Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon for this live solo event. We are going live this Sunday evening on our Cutting Through the Culture show. Some of you who watch the show may have noticed that lately Keisha King has been hosting the show. I'm still producing it and putting the montages together and lining up the clips and all these different things, but it just seems that it works a lot better when she hosts and Blanche, Chuck, and myself are able to do the commentary, and it just makes for a show that flows a lot better. So what do you all think? Do you think that Keisha should be the established host of the show? Do you think that I should do it? Do you think we should continue passing it around? Do you want to see Chuck take a stab at being the host, or do you think Chuck serves better as an interviewee as opposed to the interviewer? Interested in hearing your guys' feedback, so do feel free to comment your thoughts. So I wanted to get into this topic today, particularly as it pertains to the subculture that we see here in the United States known as Black culture. And I know we talk a lot about Black culture. I do on my individual platform. We also talk a lot about Black culture on Cutting Through the Culture. And so you're probably fed up with hearing about it at this point. Bear with me one quick second. Sorry about that. I was getting a little hot in here, but I'm probably fed up with me talking about it, but I wanted to go at it from a slightly different angle today, and look at some of you guys know me. I like to always bring history into it. I always like to bring historical events into the equation and use these kind of historical events as an example of the kinds of things that I talk about specifically as it relates to culture. You all know, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, then you know that I am of the opinion that racism isn't as much of a problem as culture is, and how people show up to the world and how people display and present themselves to the world. To the extent that you display yourself and you portray yourself in a certain way, everyone else is going to react or respond to how you present yourself, how you display yourself. And the fact of the matter is, much of what we learn about our past, specifically as it relates to the treatment of Black folks, is false. It's false, or it's an exaggeration, or it's there's a lot more to the story. As a researcher myself, I found this to be true across the board. When it comes to church burnings, you find that it wasn't actually the Klan that was burning down these Black churches. And to the extent that it was the Klan that was burning down these Black churches, you find that it was actually the communists who were putting them up to it. Or it was communists themselves who were burning down the Black churches. Or it was the pastors who were burning down their own churches and then framing the Klan. You know what I mean? So it's like you find that there's actually way more to the story than what we're told, or that what we're led to believe, or what we're taught in our public, state-funded schools and taxpayer-funded schools. So, again, to the extent that you have racism in a place like the United States of America, you find that there's certain powers that be that insist upon keeping division, be it on race, be it on sex, be it on whatever the case may be, age. They stoke this kind of division, this kind of racial animosity and gender animosity and so on and so forth, because they stand to benefit from it in some way, shape, or form. And we've seen that since the turn of the 20th century, and I would even argue even prior to the turn of the 20th century. And so I wanted to show you a couple of case studies. One is from the 1970s in New Jersey, when they were trying to build some housing projects called the Kawai Towers. And you had these Black militant groups, these Marxist groups, who were rallying all these Black folks together to show up and to encourage and egg on the building of these projects. And of course, you had some concerned citizens in New Jersey who knew the kind of riffraff that the building of these housing projects would bring. And so naturally, they showed up to protest the building of these housing projects. So I want to share with you an excerpt from a short film, a short documentary of sorts that was made concerning this incident, concerning this issue, that was done by the Black Journal, which is a show that used to be on television back in the day. I also want to get into a couple of modern clips, one of which includes the anti-racist, she calls herself, known as Robin DiAngelo, and how she, and the reason I wanted to show you her or some of the things that she's saying is because one of the things that I'm recognizing about her is hip to the fact that folks like myself, folks like Larry Elder, and others who are in this space are calling out people like Robin and DiAngelo as being the true racists, as part of being like the real problem, as the real kind of stokers of race division. Because we are beginning to point folks like her out, they are now kind of moving the goalposts and are finding sophisticated ways to kind of maneuver themselves out of our grip. And so I wanted to show you some of their argumentation and some of the ways that we can in turn argue back against their argumentation, if that makes sense. So what ways that we can rebuff their argumentation. So we have a lot to get into today, but before I do, wanted to read some of your comments. Let's see here. Whoops. Let's see. Dayon says, "Happy Friday, family." What is that? Orange and Linsky says, "I like the free form structure you have always had." Thank you. I appreciate that. Dayon says, there's so much to explore and unpack with Black culture. Black culture is just Satan masquerading as a angel of light. I agree. Let's see. The Standard of Truth podcast, grace and peace, folks. Thank you for being with me. Standard of Truth. And then we have 02122 says, if I get fired for watching Chad live stream at my cubicle, that's systemic oppression. Well, don't blame me. Blame the white man, I guess. So let's see here. So I wanted to play this clip from the Kawai Towers first, because I think that there's some interesting things going on in this particular clip. If I can find it, bear with me one quick second. Well, before I do that, I did want to shout out my friend Judge Joe Brown. Judge Joe Brown, as many of you know, was running for mayor in Memphis, Tennessee. And he lost. Hey, Lady T. How are you doing? So yeah, Judge Joe Brown was running for mayor in Memphis, and he lost. And, and it actually shocked me. It shocked me because Judge Joe Brown is a recognizable name. He was on television in the early 2000s. He is a cultural icon in the Black culture, the Black community. Memphis is predominantly Black. And so I thought, yeah, it's going to be a walk in the park for Judge Joe Brown. Apparently it wasn't. He didn't come in first place. He didn't even come in second place. He lost quite handedly. And to me, what that shows me is how deep the not only corruption, but how the political system runs, even in a place like Memphis, where you can pretty much render someone who has as big of a name as Judge Joe Brown irrelevant. You can pretty much render them irrelevant. You can pretty much render them as a nobody when it comes to the who you place or do not place in political power. I wanted to show you a picture of a image that was ran by their local news channel. Pay attention to the image that they have for Judge Joe Brown. Watch this. So Judge Joe Brown posted this on his Twitter, actually, but this is an image. Why can't I blow this down? Whoops. I still got to get used to using Ecamm, because if this was StreamYard, it wouldn't be this big, and I'll be able to. I'm going to try that one more time. Okay, so for some reason I can't This is annoying. All right. Okay, so anyway, it's not letting me do it to where you can actually see the entire image. It shows up like and takes up the whole entire screen. But anyway, this is the image that they put for Judge Joe Brown. That's clearly not Judge Joe Brown. I wanted to be able to show you the entire image so you can see Judge Joe Brown's comment at the top here. You can only see a portion of it. If I try to bring it down to where you can see it, the whole thing disappears from the screen. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. But anyway, Floyd Bonner here, he came in second place. Judge Joe Brown, who, this isn't even an image of Judge Joe Brown. This is an image of some, other random guy. This is what they had. I think it's the Channel 5 News. Whenever, people who wanted to vote would go to their website, whatever, they would see this image. They wouldn't see the actual Judge Joe Brown. And again, this is one of many tactics that are used in these kind of local elections so as to get you to vote for the guy that they want you to vote for. You understand what I'm saying? And so again, and this too is black people's fault. This isn't just Channel 5's News's fault. This is black people's fault, because the fact of the matter is Judge Joe Brown threw his hat in the ring, I think, over a year ago. He announced that he's running for mayor over a year ago, and his campaign has been doing a lot to get out the word, to inform people that he's voting. And I think somewhere around 2,000 people showed up to vote. In a city like Memphis, where a little over 2,000 people showed up to vote, that's a fraction of the population there in Memphis. Significantly more than 2,000 people live in Memphis. But when it comes to the actual people who showed up to vote, again, a little over 2,000. So it's black people's fault. And not only that, but, for those who did intend to vote and showed up, and went to the website and then saw that, who do we have on the lineup? Who do we have on the ballot? What are my options? Whenever the news, basically like the news networks, whenever they deliberately put an image up there that's not Judge Joe Brown, they know that black folks are going to be more inclined to vote for the celebrity. And so if we put some other stranger up there who's not Judge Joe Brown, they are going to vote for our guy and not they're not going to go off of their impulse, which is to vote for the celebrity. So they understand the inner workings of the black mind, these news networks. And so, my hat goes off to them, kudos. But, this is black people's fault, because why are you duped to this degree in the first place? Where you're going to vote for the celebrity just because they're a celebrity. Now, in this particular circumstance, the celebrity just so happened to be the best option. But but at the same time, it is your own fault that the news networks know you so well that you are going to vote for the celebrity. So they saw it fit to put some other image of some stranger up there instead of the actual Judge Joe Brown. Anyway, I thought that was funny. I mean, I think it's unfortunate that Judge Joe Brown lost. I think, Memphis, they had a opportunity to have a quick come up in terms of the kind of leadership that they put up there. Someone who would clean house, someone who would get rid of the corruption, someone who would put Memphis on the right track. They chose not to do that because black people don't want to be great. They preach a lot about black excellence and black this and black that, but at the end of the day, they don't genuinely want to be great. They don't genuinely want someone who represents law and order, who represents, dignity and decency. They don't really want that. They'll talk about that. They'll pay lip service, but they don't really want that. And that shows in, who we elect as our leaders. Or not our leaders, but who we elect as our political representation, because no man's a leader over me. But yeah, it shows in how and who it is we elect as our political representation. We don't really want to be great, black culture, and it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. So let's see here. Speaking of not wanting to be great, speaking of not wanting to rise to the occasion. Here is a clip from the Kawai Towers documentary I was talking about.
Nationalist organizations are always talking about the need to transform the community. and the people identify, I think, nationalists and Pan-Africanists.
So this is Ememu Baraka. I think he's still alive, by the way. Wasn't he Marianne Williamson's pick for vice president when she ran for president in 2020 or 2016? One or the two. I'm pretty sure that's who that guy is. But anyway, he was part of this effort to build these housing projects there in New Jersey. And listen to what he's saying. And this goes back into what I was talking about earlier with regard to black people not wanting to be great. And I see that somebody asked the question of why. What is my opinion as to why I believe that black folks don't want to be great? I'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's get to this through this clip, because I think the answer lies in this clip.
You know, nationalist organizations are always talking about the need to transform the community. And the people identify, I think, nationalists and Pan-Africanists more with rhetoric than, concrete delivery of goods and services. We wanted to demonstrate that our concerns were the same as the general community's concerns. That is, better housing, schools, the same things that the average brother or sister understands as being necessary,
So listen to what he's saying. He's saying that, us Pan-Africanists, us, Nation of Islam, those of us who are black Marxist militant groups, a lot of people charge us with being full of rhetoric, full of talk. But we're not just full of rhetoric. We're not just full of talk. We want the same thing the larger society wants. We want better housing. We want better schools. We want better this. We want better that. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of black people will tell you they want to be great. They will tell you that they want to be excellent. They will tell you that they want better. They'll tell you that until they're blue in the face. But when faced with the opportunity to let rubber hit the road, they again punt on what the necessary actions one must take to genuinely be great. Again, when we look at Memphis, Tennessee, the people had the opportunity to put as their mayor someone who talked about Memphis corruption, someone who talked about the fact that tax dollars are being misallocated and there's a lot of malpractice going on in the municipal building there in Memphis, who talked about the problem with gangs and all the other like all of the other issues that are going on in a place like Memphis. And he gave you point by point by point things that he would do to clean up Memphis. So you had the opportunity to be great and you chose to go with someone else. And part of your choosing to going with someone else wasn't just by your own volition. You were like sheep kind of, guided in the direction as to who you should vote for by the establishment, by the Memphis establishment, and by the establishment of outsiders, people like George Soros and others, by the DNC. The DNC's worst enemy when it comes to the black community, their worst enemy, and this is also true of the RNC, I would argue, but the DNC's worst enemy is a black man who doesn't kowtow and acquiesce to the Marxian talking points and has plans to in a sense, reignite the spirit of entrepreneurship, of personal responsibility, family values, someone who would re-empower the family and re-empower the man. And when I say the man, I mean you and I, men to be men and to be great. Someone who would re-empower us to do that, not blaming everything on racism, not blaming everything on the system, not blaming on everything on the white man or whatever else, but just taking responsibility, taking personal responsibility. That is the DNC's worst enemy. And that is what Judge Joe Brown represented. And so, of course, the DNC, they put a lot of their power, their money, their attention behind someone who would toe the line. And that's what ended up happening. And that is why Judge Joe Brown lost. And so, again, black people don't genuinely want to be great. They will tell you, they'll pay lip service to this notion that they want to be great, but when the rubber hits the road, they're not interested in that at all. And again, you see it in the 1970s in this particular clip. where he's saying like, yeah, we want housing, we want this, we want that, we want the other. But how does one acquire housing? I mean, I live in this house here in Texas. I worked hard. I earned the money. I bought the house, which sits on this 1.5 acre property that I own. I did that with hard work and determination. When it comes to better schooling, he said that they want better schooling. I'm not particularly pleased with any of the schools in my area, and so my children are homeschooled. But I pay for the curriculum that my wife teaches my kids, and I also contribute to the teaching of my kids. So housing, check. School, check. Both done by what? The work that I do, the sweat of my brow, putting my hand to the plow. This is how one acquires that which they wish to have. Do you see me with any picket signs demanding that the government builds me housing? Do you see me with any picket signs demanding that the government gives me a job? No, if you want to be great, you go out and be great. You go out and do it. And doing it doesn't mean begging the government to do it for you. I'm just saying. So let's keep it rolling.
You know, nationalist organizations are always talking about, the same things that the average brother or sister understands as being necessary, to transform our condition.
So he says we want the same thing everybody else wants. We want to transform our condition, but listen to how he believes that is acquired.
Those are the things that we're trying to deliver, you see. But when we try, we're obstructed, you see. People tell us that we're not constructive, and then we try to be constructive, and then that's obstructive. We disagree.
But you're not being constructive in the conventional way. Your idea of being constructive is going out and picketing and demanding that the government gives you something.
With the philosophy of most of the builders of buildings all over this town. We don't agree with that. Concerns were the same as the general community's concerns. That is, better housing, schools, the same things that the average brother or sister understands as being necessary, to transform our condition. Those are the things that we're trying to deliver, you see. But when we try, we're obstructed, you see. People tell us that we're not constructive, and then we try to be constructive, and then that's obstructive. We disagree with the philosophy of most of the builders of buildings all over this town. I mean, they're capitalists, you see, and we don't agree.
Oh, okay. So he says we disagree with the philosophy of the builders all across New Jersey, all across Newark. And the reason why he says we disagree with them is because they're capitalists. Oh, okay. Well, hold on. Let's rewind here for a second. Just a moment ago, you said that you want to better your condition, but then you're saying you disagree with somebody who is being constructive on the basis of the fact that they are capitalists. And so if you're rejecting capitalism, if you're rejecting the free market enterprise system, if you're rejecting the meritocracy or the meritocratic way in which one gains capital and the way in which one acquires wealth or acquires property, if you're rejecting that, how then do you expect to be great like you said you want to be a few seconds ago? If you are rejecting the meritocratic way, the conventional way that one acquires greatness, that one acquires wealth, that one acquires property, if you are rejecting that because by your own admission, that's not your philosophy, you have a Marxist philosophy, how then can you be great? Marxism doesn't seek to make you great. Marxism doesn't seek to make you or put you in a better situation than you are currently under. It doesn't. It doesn't. Marxism only seeks to make everybody equally poor. That is the goal of Marxism. Marxism seeks to basically eliminate the middle class, to completely eliminate and in some cases assassinate and annihilate the middle class, just completely get rid of it, and only have two classes in society: the serfs and the nobility. That's it. That's it. You're certainly not going to be the nobility. You're certainly not going to be at the tip top in the upper echelon of society under a Marxist system. And so, with that being the case, there's only two more places to go. in a Marxist society? The grave or amongst the peasants and the serfs? That's it. Those are the only options you have. You're not equipped to be in the nobility under a Marxist system. You're just not. And so, you know, again, like whenever black folks, whenever the black culture tells you that they want to be great, that they want the same things everybody else have, they might want the same things everybody else have, but they're not willing to undergo the same work, the same trials and tribulations that others go through to get what they have. And when I say black culture, of course, I'm not talking about all black people. I'm just saying that the tenets and the philosophies and the beliefs, the body politic, if you will, of what we're told black culture is one that subscribes not to the free market, but rather to a socialist way of thinking. And one cannot acquire wealth through socialism. They just can't.
Buildings all over this town. I mean, they're capitalists, you see, and we don't agree with that, you know, but we don't try to stop them from building. So,
how do you see the stand of the opposing side? Do you think they have a valid argument?
Well, the argument is based on Anthony Imperiale's need for, you know, political notoriety. That's basically it. As far as them having a valid, you know, concept, I mean, it's just racist. I mean, he can get them, you know, like.
So, according to Baraka, he's saying that Imperiale's disagreement with this idea of these housing projects being built is predicated on racism. What is his proof of that? Nothing at all, except for the fact that Mr. Imperiale is white, that he's Italian. And so because he is a white Italian, he is naturally a racist, since he doesn't want to see these housing projects built. That's not the case. The fact, once again, is that people understand the riffraff that comes along with the building of housing projects, or I'm sorry to say it, but also apartment buildings in general. People understand the riffraff that comes along with that. If you live in a house where you pay property taxes, you know, your kids go to school, they play outside, this, that, and a third, and you receive news of the fact that they're going to be building a housing project or a bunch of apartments across the fence line, you will take issue with that. Either if you're responsible, you'll either show up to the next city council meeting and you'll verbalize your disagreement with that, or, you know what I mean, if it goes through, if it passes and they begin construction on it, you'll begin trying to figure out, okay, it's time to sell. Where should we move to now? If you're responsible. I know one lady who she opted not to do that. She got the letter in the mail. They're going to be building, or you know, they're going to be receiving public opinion because they're going to be building some housing projects across the fence line. And she was one of the woke types. Of course, she was a white lady, and she believed that, well, you know, yeah, there's going to be a lot of black folks living in these housing projects, but I want for my kids to be acquainted with other cultures and with black culture, and I want for them to understand that, yeah, you're privileged, or for my kids to understand, yeah, you're privileged, but at the same time, you know, you can use your privilege for good. And what better place to start than to befriend some of these kids who are going to be moving in across the backyard fence line. So, of course, they went through with the building of the apartments. She opted not to move. And long story short, her kids are getting beaten up. She's getting things stolen from her property. And, you know, it just kind of is what it is. She ultimately ended up moving. But, you know, like, people understand the riffraff that goes along with the building of these housing projects. So that is what people take issue with. Has nothing to do with racism. Once again, it goes back to how you present yourself to the world, how you portray yourself to the world. When you portray yourself to the world in a degenerate manner, you can't then complain when people begin to reject you. when people begin to recoil away from you. You can't blame society for being racist when you present yourself in such a degenerate manner that people begin to pull away from you and people begin to recoil away from you. You can't do it because you're being disingenuous and you're being dishonest at that point. But, you know, he accuses Imperiali of being racist. So let's see what Mr. Imperiali has to say.
Quasi-emotional, on the racist issue.
Some whites hid from our cameras.
About separatism.
Anthony Imperial, head of a North Newark citizens group, was one of few whites who consented to be interviewed by Black Journal.
We don't need it. The city of Newark was built a long time ago on black and white, and many people living together. I lived with black all my life, but not this kind of black like Jones, who desecrates the image of God and desecrates a man because...
Oh, okay. Now, how often do you hear that side of the story? How often do you hear that point of view? You see, your radio speakers and your television sets and all these different things, like, they're flooded with the poor black person who's accusing everybody of being racist, and this is racist and that's racist and this person is racist. But very rarely do you hear the white person come along and say, well, no, actually, I've lived with black people all my life. I've gotten along with black people all my life. Our town, our city was built with blacks and whites working together. What we don't get along with is this kind of black person, this militant Marxist type of black person who comes along causing trouble, wreaking havoc and spreading division. That's the kind of black person I don't get along with. And also don't get along with white people who do the same thing. If the Klan were to march into Newark, New Jersey, do you think Mr. Imperial would be locking arms with them? Or do you think he'll take issue with that too? I would venture to say it's the latter. And so they want to be selectively angry and accusing people like Mr. Imperial of being a racist. I kept calling him Imperiali earlier, but they want to accuse him of being a racist because he doesn't want the housing project built in Newark. Now, Newark is a dump hole right now. This is, of course, the 1970s. And so it's fallen pretty rapidly within that space of time. But again, it's more like anytime you hear somebody accusing everything and everyone of being racist, anytime you hear someone accusing everyone and everything of being racist, it's easy to just go along with their story and to sympathize with their story, because we have all been conditioned to sympathize with those accusations through our public schools, through the entertainment industry, by our own elected officials. And so everywhere you turn, you're being told to believe the individual who is accusing you, accusing America, accusing the system of being racist. That's what we're told to do. And because we're told to do that, we're quick to join in and lock arms with efforts that we are told that will help to fight against racism. And the whole thing's nonsense. The whole thing is BS. It just is. And so when I listen to Mr. Imperial talk, and he's saying, no, we've actually always gotten along with black people. We just don't get along with the individuals, the Marxists. And Baraka, Mumu Baraka, whatever his name is, he told you that he's a Marxist. He told you that he's against capitalism. The very fact that he's setting up on the picket line, demanding that the housing projects be built, is indicative of his Marxist philosophy. The very existence of a housing project is reminiscent of Marxism. The state providing housing, what comes along with that? The state providing your food, the state providing your medication and your medical care and this, that, and the third. The government the state basically providing everything for you. The housing project and the existence thereof is the quintessence of socialism. And so everything about what Amumu Baraka, whatever his name is doing is indicative and exemplary of a Marxist philosophy, a Marxist ideology, what he's doing and what he's saying with his words. And one of the things that is true of Marxists is that to the extent that someone gets in their way, to the extent that someone seeks to stop them on their quest to Sovietize everything, what they then do is character assassinate those foes so that they can then discredit them in the eyes of the public. This is where the word racist come from. This is why he called Anthony Imperial a racist. The man is clearly not a racist, but it becomes advantageous for you to call him a racist if it means getting him out of the way that you might then build your housing project.
Some whites hid from our cameras.
About separatism.
Anthony Imperial, head of a North Newark citizens group, was one of few whites who consented to be interviewed by black journals.
We don't need it. The city of Newark was built a long time ago on black and white, and many people living together. I lived with black all my life, but not this kind of black like Jones, who desecrates the image of God and desecrates a man because it's not within his thinking. And I don't think that we should subject our children or anyone to it. It's just that this man represents something that other than American. And the people are afraid of it. They have a right to be afraid of it because it is a very dangerous enemy.
This man represents something that's completely un-American. The people are afraid of it. We shouldn't subject our children to it, but the people are afraid of it, and they have a right to be afraid of it because it is representative of an evil, dangerous enemy. It's basically what he said in the gist, and I agree with him. Marxist ideology is un-American. It's simply and blatantly un-American. So he's absolutely right. And the fact of the matter is, everywhere in America where Marxist ideology has been employed, the decay and disintegration of that particular region was sure to follow. I talked yesterday in my live about, libertarians who advocate and argue for the legalization of the selling of drugs. I talked about that. And part of my issue with that is that the legalization of the selling of drugs, heroin, meth, crack, cocaine, the legalization of the selling of the drugs in a given society or in a given region within a society is indicative of an amoral society, is indicative of a society that doesn't know God, that's not pro-family, that isn't pro-decency. Think of the darkest, most backward, zigzag area that that's close to where you live. For me, it'd be Deep Ellum, which is a part of Dallas, where they have the bars and they have just a lot of riffraff that goes on. There's shootings every weekend. It's just decadent and chaotic. That's what Deep Ellum is. That is what I envision when I think of a region or a society where you just have the free flowing of drugs and, there's no law, there's no order. It's just completely chaotic. And so when it comes to the question of whether or not drugs or the selling of drugs should be legal, I think that's an argument worth having, because those who are on the libertarian side of the equation, I think that they have some really solid arguments to make. I will give it to them. I think they have some really solid arguments to make. But I think what gets lost in the noise whenever there's this back and forth between folks like myself who are traditionalists and conservatives and believe in the edicts of the Constitution, when it comes to folks like myself who's arguing against someone who is a true blue libertarian on the issue of whether or not drugs should be, or the selling of drugs should be legal, I think one of the things that get lost in these kind of arguments is a simple question. And that question is, what kind of society do we wish to have? What kind of society do we wish to have? That's the question that get lost. And I'm not talking about at the federal level. I'm talking about at the local level. Because after all, we do live in a constitutional republic. And in a constitutional republic, it's not all about the federal government. It's about the individual. It's about the freedom of the individual, of the locality, the sovereignty of the states, not being infringed upon by an all-powerful monarchical government. That is what our constitutional republic is supposed to represent. And so there's something to be proud of when it comes to the township at the local level. That's something to behold. The fact that it doesn't matter what Joe Biden says, at the end of the day, my town is going to operate the way my town sees fit. But what has happened over the years is because there's so much funding tied up between the locality and the federal government gets to then pull the strings and dictate how the township operates. It was never meant to be that way, constitutionally speaking. It was never meant to be that way, but that's where we are. Because there's ignorance as it pertains to our constitutional republic and what that means for the township and the individual. There's ignorance. And then two, there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of government corruption, which then goes back to the ignorance piece, because if we were more educated as an electorate, then we would watchdog our politicians better. We will provide a kind of citizens check and balance on our government from the local level all the way up to the federal government. And to the extent that they begin to do something that's unbecoming of their office, we remove them, we primary them, and we put in their place somebody who's going to do a better job. But we don't do that well. And so we get the government we deserve. But that's a different story for a different time. That's a different life for a different time. But I want to bring it back to this whole drug thing. The question becomes, what kind of society do we wish to have? I, for one, want a society, want a local kind of community where it's safe for my kids to play outside, where it's safe to even raise a family in the first place. That's what I want. Where the churches are strong, that's clean and aesthetically pleasing to the eye, that's well cultured. That's what I want. That's the kind of community I wish to live. So the question then becomes that if that is the kind of community that we wish to have, can such a community exist with the free flowing of drugs? If you have some sense, if you have a brain, the answer is no. The answer is no. But if you wish not to have that, if you wish to have a bar on every corner, if you wish to have a society in which, you know what I mean, like we don't really care about the whole like family thing. We don't really care about this whole notion of raising up children and all that. We would rather live, have a society where people are free to, wear clothing that's scandalous and that's, provocative and promiscuous. And we want, for people to be able to fornicate in public and this, that, and the other. If that's the society that you want, then it would then make sense to allow, again, the free flowing of drugs and things of this nature. Now, maybe I'm being a little extreme, but I'm just drawing a difference between two different kinds of societies, two different kinds of communities. And so the question, once again, is, can you have the kind of society where it's safe to raise a family while at the same time encouraging the selling of drugs? Can you have that? And this is once again one of the reasons why I believe that a lot of these decisions should be made at the local level. This is why I believe that it should be made at the local level. I do believe in a small federal government. I do believe in a small state government. that doesn't infringe, once again, on the rights of the township, and from there, the rights of the families and the individuals. But again, I understand how complex and how nuanced this is, because, you know, some people might hear me say, well, yeah, you want a small government, but at the same time, you want the government to regulate the selling of drugs. Like, no, I don't want them to regulate the selling of drugs. I want them to completely outlaw the selling of drugs. Completely outlaw it, because we've seen the degradation, the destruction, and the chaos that ensues when drugs are allowed to just be poured into the community. And maybe we should do a live, and I can invite probably some experts up on the subject, because I do believe that the government has been responsible for the distribution of drugs over the course of the last 100 years. And I also believe that there's been times where the government has tested drugs on some of our soldiers. So, you know, for me, I guess I'm kind of I don't know. I'm kind of torn on the whole subject, just because it's like, yes, I am a hardliner when it comes to not believing or that drugs should be able to flow freely in society. I'm a hardliner on that. I'm not going to back away from that. At the same time, do I really trust the government? Does the government really have a moral ground to stand on when it comes to, outlawing drugs? I would say no, because the government hasn't done that great of a job in terms of, being a drug seller in itself, if that makes sense. So the government doesn't really have a leg to stand on. But at the same time, I go back to the fact that we are the government in a constitutional republic. The government is a representation or a reflection of us. So we are the government. So it all comes back full circle in a way. Let's see here. I think I have another clip. So the topic is, you are the problem. Hello? Yeah. So the topic is, you are the problem. It's not the white man. It's not the establishment. It's not the system. You are the problem. You are the problem. And the whole point of titling it that is to, again, encourage personal responsibility. Because that's not to say, like, when I say you're the problem, I'm not taking away the role that the government has played historically in the demoralization of society. Nor am I taking away from the fact that, again, our government is always up to nefarious activity, both Republican and Democrat, doesn't matter. They do bear some blame. But at the end of the day, they can only have as much control over you as you give them. Hollywood, the entertainment industry, can only have as much control over you as you allow them to have, with the turning on the television, with the listening of the radio, so on and so forth. What you expose yourself to, so to speak. So you can't give in to what it is they're giving you, and then blame them when you were weak enough to fall for it in the first place. Can Eve really blame Satan for tricking her into eating the forbidden fruit, when she should have exercised good enough judgment to not fall for his tricks and schemes? She certainly tried to. Can Adam, genuinely blame Eve for presenting the fruit to him and convincing him to eat it, when he should have exercised good enough judgment to not fall for it? Can he genuinely blame her? He certainly tried to. And so this goes back to the Garden of Eden. When you see black culture blaming all of its its disparities and L's on the system and the white man and everyone else, that's indicative of the garden. That's the same exact thing that happened in the garden, blaming your own downfall on somebody else. Now, that doesn't negate the fact that there was a intention, there was the action of someone trying to trick you or to fool you or to convince you to go a direction that you ought not go. That doesn't negate that fact. But at the end of the day, it's on you to have enough discernment, to have enough self-control, to have enough wisdom to not be tricked, to not be fooled. And if you are fooled once, then you should develop the kind of wisdom to say, okay, I was tricked already. I'm not going to be tricked again. I'm not going to allow that to happen to me again. So you learn from your mistakes, or you learn from other people's mistakes, that you might not fall into the same traps. But when you look at black culture, what's interesting is that time and time and time again, black culture falls for the same traps. They fall for the same tricks. And every time it works to their detriment. Every time it works to their detriment, what do? They don't lick their wounds and resolve to not be the same kind of people that fell for the traps and the tricks to begin with. No, they don't do that. They don't take responsibility and say, well, I fell for it. I'm not going to let that happen to me again. I'm going to resolve to do better. No, they don't do that. What they do is they blame the white man. They blame the white man. They blame the establishment. They blame the system. And then they go right back into trusting that same entity, that same white man, whether this time he came in the form of a progressive, this time he came in the form of a liberal or Marxist, so I can trust him this time, right? No, he was a Marxist and a liberal the last time too, and the time before that too, and the time before that too, and the time before that too. And they're getting more sinister with it now. They're getting more creative with it now. Now it doesn't even have to be a white man. It can be Jay-Z. It can be Cardi B. It can be Sexy Red. It can be Kendrick Lamar. It can be Snoop Dogg. It can be Tyler Perry. It can be TD Jakes. It can be, you name them. They don't even have to be a white progressive, because you have black folks who are doing the same exact things and are leading the masses of black culture down the tubes, down the drain. So this isn't just white people's fault. Again, are you willing to take responsibility and be accountable for your own actions? And it's not just black culture. Again, what the devil does, what Satan does, is he attaches himself to you, and he finds insecurities, and he finds things or aspects about you that he can convince you makes you a marginalized person. And this is why Marxist rhetoric works so well with those who are quote unquote poor, or those who are convinced that they are poor. Those who he convince. So again, if he can convince you that you're poor and that, you are attacked by the system, or you are working class, and because you're working class, you haven't been dealt a good hand in life. If he can convince you of that, then he can then use that for his own sinister means. I wanted to give you an example of that. This is a man, and two, that's irrespective of race, by the way. And I say that to set up this next clip. This is a white man speaking.
I'm not ashamed to get welfare because, for one thing, I'm a product of the state. The state produced me, and if you evaluate it logically, the fact that I was placed in an orphanage before I was 6, I was transferred to a reformatory before I was 10. I got out when I was 13, went back when I was 13, got out when I was 16. Went back when I was 16, got out when I was 19, went to the penitentiary when I was 20, didn't get out until I was almost 28, went back before I was 30, etc., then welfare is just a logical continuum of my lifestyle. You must commit ethnic suicide in this society in order to fit into a WASP society. And the further away you get away from blonde, blue-eyed, white, Protestant thought, attitude, dress, lifestyle, and everything, bam, the further you get away from success. I'm not.
So what he's saying is 100% an utter cap. What he's saying is 100% an utter cap. For one. And two, like, I mean, this reminds me of something, by the way. I'm not sure if you guys caught that whole thing. But this reminds me of the Great Commission. Because he says that, well, I have no problem with accepting welfare. And by the way, to the extent that you accept welfare, you make yourself property of the state. And when you make yourself property of the state, you become the state's to do with what the state pleases. The state dictates where you live. The state dictates everything. Everything. What kind of medication you get and health care you get and things of this nature. They just dictate and they plan and moderate your life. To the extent that you make yourself subject to the welfare state, you give the government permission to run your life and to control your life. So he says that, you know, I don't have a problem with welfare because I am the property of the state. I am the result of the state. And he begins to talk about, you know, when I was a kid, I was part of the foster care system. I then went to jail. I then went to this. I then went to that. And so, yeah, it's a logical conclusion that I will just end up on welfare. And then he goes on to talk about, you know, separating yourself from your ethnic identity if you want to be successful in America, which we'll get to in a moment. That seems like an entirely separate conversation. So we'll get to that in a moment. But I wanted to focus on what he was saying in the first half of the clip, which is, you know, I'm a property of the state because ever since I could remember, I have been involved in state institutions. This, folks, is why the Great Commission is so important, why it's vitally important. Because the fact of the matter is, regardless of who you were born to, where in the country or where in the world you were born, the fact is, the gospel is for all of us. It's for all of us. And it can save us out of any condition, whatever that condition may be. It can save you out of any condition, whatever that situation may be. Whether you're born in a foster home, whether you didn't know your parents, whether you're born in a two-parent household, a single-parent household, whatever the case may be, what we tend to think in this day and age is that who you are born to will dictate the kind of person you become. And that's true, practically speaking, but God. I know somebody who is a product of a rape. The man is doing quite well for himself, owns his own business, has his own family with 2 beautiful daughters. I know another person who didn't know their parents growing up. They were sent to a foster home. They were in and out of foster homes growing up. They ended up in one foster home where the mother and the father were active in their church. They showed the love of Christ to the children that came under their care. And so the kids were thus required to go to church with this family. And it was through going to church and hearing the gospel that this young lady was born again and sought to pursue Christ. And today she's married and have kids and loves the Lord. And so it doesn't matter where you are in the world or who you're born to, or whatever the case may be, we as Christians, we as God's remnant are tasked with the Great Commission. We are tasked with the Great Commission. This is why we shouldn't just throw people away. Because to the extent that we just throw people away, they become like the man in the clip, where they believe I'm a product of the state. Therefore, I don't see any problem with welfare. I was born in the hands of the state. I will die in the hands of the state. When the reality is, we know very clearly that there's a distinction between the state and God. Jesus said himself, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. And so if you belong to God, if you're a property of God, then you reject being property of the state, which includes being a beneficiary, or a benefactor rather, of welfare, of the welfare system. Is it a sin to be on welfare? I would argue that it isn't. But when you look at what goes along with the welfare state, and all the social workers and everything that goes along with it, again, it's meant to separate you from God. Its whole purpose is to separate you from God. The ACLU would argue as much. To the extent that you have social workers and the welfare system and the programs and the policies and this, that, and the other, the ACLU would say that there's supposed to be a separation between church and state. And so to the extent that a social worker or a policymaker or whomever tries to minister to you in your state of affliction, as someone who is seeking welfare, someone who is seeking food stamps, someone who is seeking WIC and this, that, and the other, to the extent that you find this person in their most vulnerable state and you try to minister to them the gospel as a representative or an agent of the government, you are running afoul with the law, says ACLU. I'm just telling you what it is. And so again, the whole purpose of becoming property of the state is to separate you from God. That's according to the ACLU. And so again, and then too, the last part of the clip, what did he say?
I'm not ashamed to get welfare because, for one thing, I'm a private. Went back before I was 30, etc. Then welfare is just a logical continuum of my lifestyle. You must commit ethnic suicide in this society in order to fit into a WASP society. And the further away you get away from blonde, blue-eyed, white, Protestant thought, attitude, dress, lifestyle, and everything, bam, the further you get away from success.
So he says the further you get away from a white society, dressing decently, going to church, being a decent person, being a person of integrity, like the West requires you to do, to the extent that you do all those things, you get further and further away from success. And he's saying that as if it's a problem. To where I'm asking, like, where is the problem? What are we talking about? Like, what's the big deal? Yeah, I mean, that's a universal truth. That's not just a white thing. That's a universal truth. Go to any country and you'll find the same thing. What country can you go to where you see people in parliament or in a business meeting or whatever the case may be, dressed raggedy, have stuff all over their face, have food on their clothes, have their hair in a mess and in disarray? Like, where in the world can you go and you go to the upper echelon of that particular society and you see just decadence and chaos and destruction as far as how the people carry themselves? No. We as a people, regardless of who we are and where we are in the world, we are more attracted and have much more respect for that which is decent than that which is not. It's not a white thing. You can go to countries in Africa and see the same thing. Go to a parliamentary house where government proceedings take place in any part of Africa, and you'll see people dressed in suits. I mean, have they been colonized, or have they been bitten by the bug of the white man? Is that what you're trying to convince me of? Go to any part of Asia. Do you see people coming into parliament dressed raggedy? No. Decency is a universal concept. It just is. And so what these people are convinced of, and this is the problem with black culture too, is that I should be able to dress any kind of way, wear my hair any kind of way, talk any kind of way, sag, cuss, listen to my music loud, smoke weed in public. I should be able to do all that stuff, just be a complete and utter degenerate, and still be treated like a respectable, upstanding citizen in America. That's the argument. They're mad because they're not successful when they're not living a life that demands respect. They're mad that they're not successful when they're not putting in the work to be successful. They think success should just be handed to them because they're entitled. This is the state of black culture. This is the state of black culture. So as promised, I wanted to get to this Robin DiAngelo clip because, again, I made the argument earlier in the show that, you know, a lot of folks like myself who are black, who do dabble in, you know, intellectual concepts and topics, we are at a point now where we're using our platform to call these so-called anti-racists out, calling the BS of what they're saying and giving historical context to what it is, to help make our points. Like, we're getting to the point where we are able to corner them. We are able to corner the Ibram X. Kendis and the Ta-Nehisi Coates and the Cornel Wests and the Robin DiAngelos and the, you know, you name them. We're able to corner them. We have them in the corner and we're just bodying them, right? But they're getting a little bit more sophisticated with their arguments. They're pulling an Eminem in the movie 8 Mile, where he begins to make fun of himself so as to steal power away from his opponent in the rap battle. They're getting to the point where they're doing that kind of thing with their argumentation. And I want to give you an example of that. Here's Robin DiAngelo.
Yeah, well, first, let me just say I think all white people's households are racist because we're in a racist society. So I don't actually think I'm any less or more racist than anyone else. And that includes Donald Trump. 100%. Right? Like, there's nothing that comes out of his mouth that he's not speaking a foreign language. 100%. I recognize what he says. I was raised in the same culture. There's a difference between us in that he amplifies and embraces, and I seek to challenge and interrupt. But it's not useful for me to point my finger at him and then exempt myself.
So you see the sophistication in their argumentation now, right? You see the sophistication in their argumentation now, right? She's saying, well, you know, Donald Trump is a racist. He's a bleeding heart racist. Well, bleeding heart's is a word that we use for liberals, but he's a staunch racist, and he's bold with his racism. He's unapologetic with his racism. Now, I'm racist too because I'm born into a white society. I have privilege. I have this and that and the other. And so there's racist things that I do too that I don't really recognize as racist because that's part of my privilege. But the difference between Donald Trump and I is that I try to fight against racism and make people aware of racism, whereas Donald Trump embraces and leans into his racism. And so again, she's pulling an Eminem in terms of saying, like, yeah, I'm aware of my, you know, so you can't call me a racist white liberal, nor can you say that white liberals are the real racists. You can't say that because I'm acknowledging that that's true already. And so again, it steals away the power from those black conservatives who wish to try to say, well, white liberals are the true racists. And this is part of the reason, and I have to admit, that I kind of get annoyed when I hear your run-of-the-mill black conservatives make the same argument and, you know, on Instagram or YouTube saying, well, you know, white liberals, they're the real racists. And it's like, well, yeah, everybody knows that. They would admit that. They would admit that. So you got to be a little bit more creative in what it is you're trying to say if you really want to, you know, make your point. If you really want to sell people on conservatism or, you know what I mean, on your social philosophy. You're not going to do it. You're not going to do the trick by accusing white liberals of being the real racists. That's a played out argument. It's a true argument. It's a true argument, but it's played out because everybody uses it, everybody knows it, and everybody admits it. Even the white liberals admit it. It's you have to be a little bit more. You have to be a little bit more creative and smart when it comes to making your argumentation. And this is why I bring everything back to the gospel. And I just I'll call people like Robin DiAngelo out for what they are. She's a charlatan who is trying to sell a religion that is deviant from God, that rejects God and is hostile to God, that is hostile to the Bible. She's trying to push and promote that. And I can begin to point to ways in which her philosophy or what she's teaching is not of the Bible, and how it is in fact a hollow and deceptive philosophy, and how she's using a kind of sleight of hand, a trickery of the devil, so to speak, so as to get you to go along with what it is she's saying, because she's coming as an angel of light. What she's saying sounds good. Yeah, I'm trying to fight racism. Won't you join me? What she's saying sounds good to the unsuspecting eye. However, it's rooted in this kind of Tower of Babel-esque demonic agenda. That's what it's rooted in. And as a believer, as a Christian, because my message is to Christians, my message is to believers. As a believer, like you're told, you're instructed by the Bible to test every spirit to see if it's of God. And when you test the spirit of Robin DiAngelo, you find that she's not of God. And so I don't have to get into the dirt of arguing against the rhetoric and the semantics and the this and the that and trying to one up what it is she's trying to say. Like, no, I'm just going to go for the jugular and expose the fact that what she's doing is part and parcel of a demonic agenda. And you as a believer are called to test every spirit to see if it's of God. You're also called to not be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophies. What she's teaching is a hollow and deceptive philosophy, and she's using romantic language to lull you into going along with what it is she's trying to do. So don't fall for it. Snap out of it. That's my message. Snap out of it. Because your eyes are doing this little twirly thing as you listen to people like Robin DiAngelo and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Ibram X. Kendi and Tiny Heezy Coates and others. Like, your eyes are doing that little swirly thing because you're being hypnotized. So I come to snap you out of it by saying, no, Christ and him crucified. That's who we're going to talk about. That's who we're going to preach. You're not going to be able to win your way into heaven through this works-based, not even like works-based that comes out of putting on the full armor of God and yielding fruit that can only be yielded by one who is following the Holy Spirit. Not even that kind of works-based, but works-based that's predicated on what the world tells you makes you moral and makes you right and decent and all the things. So anyway, what are we at? We're an hour and 18. Time is it? 4:30. Do I got time for one more clip? I did that one. I don't know if I want to do this. Do I want to do Nina Turner? Let's do this one here. We played some of this last Sunday. We didn't play the entire clip, but we played some of this last Sunday. But is this conducive to the actual title of the show? So this is a lady who is saying that black Christianity is like oven baked mac and cheese, whereas white Christianity is like easy bake, Kraft easy bake. Here's what that sounds like.
If you encounter somebody on your job who wants to do a potluck, and folks sign up for what they want to bring, and somebody raises their hand and says, I'll bring the mac and cheese, I would wager that black folks are going to assume it's going to look one way, and other folks are going to assume it's going to look another way. If Kraft Easy Mac shows up in the Tupperware, you're going to be mad, but they're both called mac and cheese. Neither person is incorrect in what they call it, but they are very different consistencies, very different experiences, very different traditions, and you can't go and buy oven mac and cheese in one package. And so similarly, to the point of Christianities, there are varying ways that Jesus has been packaged. And I want to suggest to us that white Christianity is easy, Mac. It's easy to do. You put it on top, you stir it up a little bit. In God we trust, one nation under God, and everything else that you do, you hide behind that label. But black Christianity requires some sweat and requires some recipes that have been passed down verbally and not written down, requires some ways of figuring out the real and presenting that to our people. And so what I want to offer is the reason why folks think it's the white man's religion is because the white man has been arrogant enough to suggest that the only kind of mac and cheese.
Yeah, that's enough of that. I've had enough. I've had enough. That went on for a minute and 30 seconds, by the way, and that's the edited version. No analogy should take that long, by the way. No analogy should take that long. I say that as somebody who probably gives like 5-minute analogies, but I digress. But where do I even begin with something like that? The fact of the matter is, Jesus said, "My burden is easy and my yoke is light." Need I say more? All that you just said in terms of white Christianity is easy. You need not do much. White Christianity is easy, whereas black Christianity, it requires a lot more of you. You have to scream, you have to shout, you have to, do all kinds of other things. You have to succumb and acquiesce to the social gospel, and you have to succumb and acquiesce to liberation theology, and you have to basically go in march, and you have to demand, you have to protest, and you have to show up to the picket line, and you have to do all this and that. What did Jesus say? My yoke is easy. My burden is light. That's what Jesus said. That's what Jesus said. He said that you must be born again. You must be born again. And so what does that mean to be born again? That means to die. You have to first die. In order to be born again, you have to first die. This version of you right now has to die. You have to die to your natural parents who taught you natural lessons in this natural world. You have to reject it. You have to put it off. You have to take up your cross and follow Christ, which means that he is your new parent. He is your new guidance. He is your new guide. He's your Lord. This word Lord is important because that makes you, in relation to the Lord, the slave, the servant, the follower. That means you're not it. You know how, black folks like to, there's this new, term, I'm him, or I'm her, or I'm a God. Y'all like to say that, don't y'all? But the reality is Christ is him. He is the beginning. And the beginning was the Word is with God, and the Word was God. He is the Word. If anyone is him, it's God, or it's Christ. God too, but you get my point. And so again, like whenever he is him, whenever he is the Lord, that makes you his servant and you his follower. And so when you follow him, he takes on your burden. He takes it on. And so again, like living a life as a born again Christian, like it is a simple life because you're not so defeated by your circumstances. To the extent that you pull a Peter and you're walking on the water, right? And you begin to pay attention to the storm and the clouds and the rain and all the things, yeah, you'll begin to sink. You will begin to sink. I promise you that. You'll begin to sink into the water. But to the extent that you keep your eyes on Christ, you'll be walking on water, regardless of the circumstances, the raging storm, the clouds, the thundering, the lightning. To the extent that you keep your eyes on Christ, you'll continue to walk on water. And so it's to that extent that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. It doesn't require much of you. It just requires a heart that belongs to him. It requires you to come out from the unbelievers and to come out from this wicked world and this wicked culture that's dark and that's dying, and to follow Christ. That's what it requires of you. And so while homegirl is up there talking about, well, no, white Christianity doesn't require much of you, but black Christianity comes with a lot more. What did Jesus say? What did Jesus say? That's the only thing I'm interested in. So I'm looking to see if anybody has any questions. Somebody said, why is this a true belief, Chad? What are you referring to? What in particular? Are you referring to Christianity or something that I said earlier? Shara Joel said, Easy Mac, or one, Easy Mac is the one in cups you microwave. Two, something tells me she can't even make baked mac and cheese. Probably likely. Let's see here. This woman has a totally different Christianity for black people. Why is that? I mean, there's a long answer to that, but the short answer, and I'll attempt to make it short. This idea of there being a black Christianity, it didn't start with her. It didn't originate with her. The fact of the matter is, there was little difference between what black pastors were teaching in their churches and what white pastors were teaching in their churches, especially in the South prior to the 1960s. A lot of black churches in the South were teaching the Orthodox fundamental gospel, and they were living out the Orthodox fundamental gospel just like many of your white churches were prior to the 1960s. But you had something called liberation theology that was pretty popular in Latin America. You had Latin liberation theology or something like that, which was rooted in Marxism. And this kind of bled into America through black liberation theology, which was popularized by the likes of people like James Cone, but it was being preached and taught by people like Martin Luther King. Now, Martin Luther King was popularized by the mainstream media. The church overwhelmingly rejected Martin Luther King whenever he first came onto the scene. But the media, being persistent as they are, they were able to make Martin Luther King appear larger than life. He was on the cover of every magazine. He was on the cover of every newspaper. A lot of what he was doing with the help of the communists here in the United States and abroad was such to where they were able to manipulate everybody into believing that he was this great moral leader when he wasn't. There was a lot of issues with Martin Luther King, namely that he rejected the deity of Christ. He said in his own papers that Jesus didn't resurrect, or he didn't believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead. He also didn't believe in the inerrancy of the scriptures, and he didn't believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. He believed very little of the Bible, in fact. He believed more in Marxism. He believed more of what was in the Communist Manifesto than what he believed what was in that Bible. He never preached the gospel. He never called people to repentance, ever. I've read every single sermon of his. Never once preached the gospel, called people to repentance. Not once. He was a perpetual adulterer, a drug user. He liked to have sex with prostitutes. This is who Martin Luther King was. Yet, he was people were made to believe that he was the moral leader of the 1960s, when in fact he wasn't. And in any event, the black church in particular, overwhelmingly rejected him initially, but because they ended up being more influenced by what the mainstream media convinces them should be their heroes, more so than going off of their own traditions, they ultimately adopted and accepted him as that moral leader, as someone to look up to and someone to behold. And so it was through the embracing of Martin Luther King as this great moral leader in the black church that the theology soon followed. And so black Americans in particular began to reject the fundamental Orthodox Reformed Christian gospel, and they began to embrace instead this kind of social liberation theology, which isn't really the gospel at all. This kind of religion that is one and the same with political activism, with socialist leftist political activism. And so this, unfortunately, is the state of a lot of churches, a lot of black churches in particular. Now, is every black church or predominantly black church a practitioner of the social gospel? No, absolutely not. There are some black churches that still believe in the orthodox fundamental Christian gospel and who preach salvation and repentance and all the things, and who don't align their church with a leftist socialist political agenda. There are black churches that do that, or predominantly black churches that do that. But again, what she's arguing is a point of view that is in alignment and is following along the current of a tradition, once again, that's rooted in this kind of Marxist Christianity that's not really Christianity at all. And so hopefully that answers your question. Of course, there's a longer version of that, but that's the Cliff Notes version. 02122 question: do you follow Easy Mac Christianity or baked mac and cheese Christianity? Hopefully I answered that question already. I reject her analogy. First and foremost, like I refuse to validate the analogy that she gives. But once again, when she uses the word Easy Mac Christianity and she says so dismissively, I for some reason was immediately reminded of Jesus saying that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I was immediately reminded of that, and I was also immediately reminded of of whenever Peter asked Jesus if he can also walk on water, and Jesus said, "Get out of the boat, walk on water." And then Peter started paying attention to all the raging storm and everything that was going on around him, which I would liken to our circumstances here, in the lives that we live, circumstances of debt or, the death of a loved one or the loss of a job or whatever the case may be. It's very easy to look at those circumstances and to forget that Christ is Lord, that Jesus is Lord. But when we keep our eyes on Jesus, regardless of what our circumstances are, it makes it easy to navigate those circumstances and to move through those seasons without being completely overwhelmed by those seasons. And two, again, it strengthens our faith in Christ, who is gracious beyond belief. That's what I believe. Somebody said, do most black people know what you're talking about right now, Chad? Probably not, but that's none of my business. It's none of my business, really. One thing I do know is, again, what the scripture says, which is like, God's word, he sends it out like the rain, like the dew. It does what it's supposed to do. It accomplishes what it's supposed to accomplish. And when it returns to him, it doesn't return to him void. And so with the things that I'm saying, my hope is that at least one person gets it and that they will prayerfully consider it, and that, God will do with it what he sees fit. So hopefully I'm not up here wasting my time, but I don't think I am. Anyway, I'm going to land the plane there. Thank you all for rocking with me this Friday afternoon. I love you all, and God bless.